Hey there. Today, I'm going to be taking you out of quarantine and over to the Mediterranean. Which part of the Mediterranean, you may ask? Well, I've got a pasta shell here, and that can only mean one thing: Italy. So, most of us have experienced something to come out of Italian culture in the last few hundred years. Italy has produced a lot of things that we see all over the Western world today, from the food, the architecture, or the language. And we're actually going to be talking about all three of those things today. So I'm going to go right into what most people think of when they hear the word Italy or Italian, and that's the food. So in Italy, food is more than just something that fills you up, something that tastes good. Food can be a piece of art. Food is very important to the culture and family gatherings. And it's a really big part of family. So something interesting about Italian food, and like most other cultures, is that when you actually go into Italy, the food is very different than outside of the nation. For example, most of the food that we see outside of Italy today isn't necessarily Italian food. It's food that a lot of the time comes from one specific region of Italy. Most of the time, that's Tuscany. And it has a few ingredients changed to fit local tastes and stuff like that. An interesting thing about food from Italy really lies in the pizza. Now, according to John Bensalvia, in an article called 10 Basic Facts of Italian Food Culture That You Need to Know, as part from the Italy magazine in 2016, pizza originally was a peasant street food that just had the bread base, none of this cheese or toppings that you see here. That was until the Queen Margherita requested that a similar dish be made for her. And one of the famous chefs of Italy at the time made a pizza, but he added some mozzarella cheese, he had some basil, he had some tomato, and he made the classic margherita pizza that we see certainly a lot in Italy and even other parts of the world today. So now that the food's all gone, all eaten up, we're going to talk about something a little bit more permanent, and that's going to be the architecture. So you can't talk about Italian architecture without talking about the Renaissance. And according to an article done by the Department of European Paintings for the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York in 2002 for part of the Hellbrunn timeline, a lot of the architects in Italy during the Renaissance were trained humanists. So that means they wanted to include things into their work that invoked emotion as well as logic. And you can see that as buildings were being designed and built left and right during the Renaissance, whether it be by the clergy, nobles with a lot of money on their hands, or city governments. Now, what a lot of these architects want to do is raise their craft from the status of being just common laborers to being recognized as artists. Now, we've talked about two classics so far: Italian food, classic; Italian architecture, classic. But we're going to talk about a third classic today, and that's going to be the Italian language itself, Italian. So Italian is actually one of 7 Romance languages. What a Romance language is a language that comes directly from Latin. And Italian is special among these Romance languages because it's arguably the closest thing we have to Latin today. So much so, in fact, that when someone is trying to pronounce a Latin word, they use the pronunciation of that letter in Italian and substitute that. And a funny thing, similar to Italian food, a lot of the times when somebody may hear an Italian accent or the Italian language outside of Italy, what they're really hearing is the Tuscan accent. And that's the result of a debate that lasted from the late medieval period all the way into the Renaissance, and it's talked about by James Sterios in a piece called Language and Nationalism in Italy for the magazine Nations and Nationalism in 2006, published by the Wiley Online Library, where many different political figures in Italy and regions in Italy wanted to decide on a unified dialect for them all to use. People such as Lorenzo de' Medici and the poet Dante were part of this debate, and ultimately Tuscany came out somewhat on top. As a result, we now all think of the Tuscan dialect and accent as the Italian dialect and accent. So now with what we've talked about today, with the food, the architecture, and the language, there's a certain theme of refinement among all three of these that really shows the rich culture of Italy. I definitely learned something while researching for the speech. I hope you learned something today too. Now, go off, have some fun, maybe some pizza, some pasta, I don't know.